A little while ago, I read about this guy named John Harvey Kellogg, and he may be one of the most interesting and terrifying people I've ever read about. So I made a few animations so I can share the story of John Harvey Kellogg with you. So our story begins with John Preston Kellogg and his wife, Ann Jeanette Stanley. So these two are part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that made them think they didn't need to take John Harvey or their other kids to school because the Seventh-day Adventist Church believed the world was going to be raptured soon. So that made it so the young John Harvey Kellogg didn't get to go to school very much outside ages 9 through 11. But afterwards, he self-educated with books, and he was really good at it. He was so good at it that he actually caught the eye of James and Ellen White, two of the co-founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they hired him at their printing press. And there, he continued to impress on the Whites. So much so that Ellen started having visions about John. Now, it's worth noting that Ellen was hit in the head with a very hefty rock as a child, so that could be why she had visions. But either way, she'd get John and she'd say, "Hey, I just heard a higher power say that you are going to be the world's greatest doctor someday, man." Now, due to his religious nature, these rock visions actually motivated John Harvey to go to medical college. And afterwards, the Whites made him the superintendent of the Western Health Reform Institution that they ran. And when he became the superintendent, he renamed it the Sanitarium, actually coining the term Sanitarium. So John Harvey Kellogg grew up to be a very weird-looking fella. He grew a Satan goatee. He wore only white suits because white, according to him, was the healthiest color to wear because it would absorb the most sunlight. He rode a bike everywhere, kept a parrot on his shoulder, and was extremely short, only being about 5'3". He was the exact opposite of his younger brother, Will Keith Kellogg, who he hired at his sanitarium so he could screw with him all day. There, he would do things like make Will Keith take notes as he went to the bathroom, so Will would smell his stinky BM fumes. Or he'd have to run beside his bike as he took notes. He treated his brother very poorly. Now, despite the information I just told you seemingly contradicting this, John Harvey Kellogg was actually fairly smart and very ahead of his time in a lot of extremely important aspects. Things like diet and exercise, helping to avoid heart disease, cleanliness and daily bathing, germ theory, ensuring operating rooms were sterile and their equipment was cleaned. You would think that last one would have been obvious, right? But pre-industrial revolution times were a little bit wacky. Now, what John Harvey Kellogg was very passionate about was food and nutrition. At the time, there wasn't very many great ways to preserve food, you see. Now, things like freeze-drying and packaging and food standards, they didn't exist yet. So, foods were preserved with deadly chemical like formaldehyde, and a lot of people who came into the sanitarium did so because their stomach hurt. Now, John Harvey wanted to prevent this, so he started experimenting in a sanitarium trying to make a food that was not only easy to digest, but good for you too. He made an imitation meat that was gross. He made granola, but it wasn't the delicious modern granola you get in a parfait. This was like some oats that tasted like nothing. He made soy milk. He made peanut butter. Now, this all led up to one day someone accidentally discovering a very delicious and delightful flake of corn. Now, that cornflake was so darn good, every single person who worked at that sanitarium wanted to take credit for it, right? The workers, John Harvey Kellogg, John Kellogg's wife, Will Kellogg. Everybody wanted credit for it, but the true inventor is a bit up in the air. Will, he realized the potential behind these cornflakes. So Will came up to John and he was like, "Oh, please, John, let me sell the cereal." "Sure, Will, I'll let you sell the cereal if you eat these worms." John would not let Will sell the cereal. But now that he had cornflakes, his goal of creating a superfood was finished, and he could focus on adding new and innovative procedures to his sanitarium. So first one up's a bit of an odd one. It's called sinusoidal current. He made a device out of old telephone wires that was made to do things like cure bad eyesight or stomach aches, just a whole litany of things it's supposed to help with, by administering an electrical current with these telephone wires. He also made a beating machine. No, you heard me correctly, it's a beating machine. It was made to increase blood flow. It's odd. Next up's the continuous bath. Just as the name sounds like, it was a very long bath. This comes from the fact that Kellogg and the Seventh-day Adventist Church both practiced hydrotherapy for a while, which was the idea you could cure ailments with water. Now, this would lead to some patients taking even month-long baths at the sanitarium. This was a chair that you would sit in, and it would violently shake you to stimulate your bowels. This was just a plain wooden chair that would violently shake, apparently up to 60 times in 1 second. Can't imagine that was that fun to sit in. Next up is the 15-quart enema. I don't know how he would fit all that water into someone like they had asses like clown cars, but apparently he had a machine that would do it. This is my favorite treatment in the whole sanitarium. It's the treatment for someone who is underweight or malnourished, was to put huge bags of sand on them. Technically helping them gain some weight very quickly. So, alongside his quack medicine, he had a lot of unpleasant beliefs. Now, most famously were his views on masturbation. He wasn't the first or only doctor to feel this way. That opinion that masturbation would cause people to go crazy was actually fairly common. The reason they thought this was a combination of religious influence, as well as doctors would go into mental institutions to study the crazy to see what made them go insane, and while they did, they were like, ew, they're all masturbating, so they thought that must be the reason why they went crazy. Now, this made John Kellogg hate masturbation, so much so he'd refer to it as self-abuse, the habit, and he would call sex the sewer drain of the body, and ridiculously, legal prostitution. So if you were a patient brought into the sanitarium and Kellogg assumed that you were masturbating, he would look out for a few symptoms. Some of those symptoms are general weakness, a cough, soreness of the lungs or the muscles of the chest, premature and defective development resulting from you using your sexual organs too early. This would make you into a stupid, dwarf-like person who couldn't grow a beard. Maybe you were untrustworthy, you were easily frightened, extra round shoulders, or if they had a weak back, or even paralysis of their lower extremities, a fondness for mustard, someone who would eat pencils, clay, plaster, or chalk, if they were unnaturally pale, if they had dark, sunken, red eyes, or moist and cold hands. Now, those were just a few of the symptoms of someone who could be masturbating. He had many, many others, and I'll list them out right now. Now, Kellogg had things he believed would exacerbate the likelihood of what he referred to as emissions. One of them was a good night's sleep. He also believed that having your bowels loaded before bed could make you more likely to have emissions. He thought that if you said swear words, it'd make you more likely to have emissions as well. And most famously was his belief that diet affected chastity. Now, he believed things like overeating made you more likely to touch yourself because the gluttony would weaken your organs. Now, for a man who hated masturbation as much as he did, you could guess he'd have a number of treatments for it at the sanitarium. Now, the majority of these treatments are extremely barbaric and terrifying, and instead of just listing them out, I think it'd be more fun to read excerpts from his book, Plain Facts for the Old and Young, blah 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 blah. It's a really long title. So I am now going to paraphrase some of the totally real and absolutely not made up stories of people he's treated for the habit at his sanitarium. One was a young man whose grades dropped in school, and supposedly he was losing all his strength. He was brought into the Kellogg Sanitarium where he interrogated him till he cracked and admitted he masturbated. He killed himself after he went home. One patient was brought into the sanitarium, and he was a mere skeleton that could only walk with the help of a rod, because every organ in his body was destroyed from his constant masturbation. After he realized that the masturbation wasn't going to immediately kill him, he left and continued doing it, to only then become a criminal because of how horribly masturbating rotted his mind away. Then, presumably, he went to jail for the rest of his life for thievery. Another one of his patients was once a very smart and promising young man till he discovered the habit of masturbation. Then, imbecility overcame him and he was taken to the sanitarium. But he degraded so much at that point it was no help. He was no longer smart. He became senseless and obtuse. He wore an idiotic expression with open drooling lips, with clothes wet soaked to the bone from his own spit. It was only with great force was he able to speak and respond to others when they spoke to him. Kellogg convinced the family to send him to a mental institution for the rest of his life. Now this leads us into the final chapter of the Kellogg story, the falling out of the brothers. For years, the back and forth between Will and John would happen where Will would ask him, "Please let me sell the cereal, John," and John would deny him. And this went on until luck struck for Will and tragedy struck for John when the sanitarium burnt down. Now this allowed Will to buy the recipes and the copyrights for the cereal from John and start selling it. And he actually was really good at selling the cereals. With the times changing, John Kellogg refused to update his batshit ideals. Though he was still very popular, his name became a little bit more obscure than it used to be, and at the same time Will had just begun to succeed. Seeing his younger brother succeed over him infuriated Kellogg, so much so that he decided to start selling cereal as well, taking the exact same box his brother was using and pumping it full of a very inferior, foul-tasting product and began selling it. Understandably, this upset Will. So he sued his brother, and in turn his brother sued him back, and they had a litigation back and forth until it led to the Michigan Supreme Court, where there would be a battle to see who had the legal right to use the name Kellogg. Then, the judge made his ruling. I side with Will Kellogg.
Oh yeah.
Afterwards, the Great Depression hit, and J. Kellogg fell even more into obscurity. But worse, he also got fat. Afterwards, he sold the sanitarium that he rebuilt, and he moved into a smaller building down in Florida, where he continued to actually operate business successfully. Because you see, Will had damaged his ego, but not his reputation or credibility. That would come from John Harvey's hands alone. Oh, help. Oh, help. I made a silly mistake and now I need a doctor's help. Do you masturbate?